to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily there's more to you than you think.
All right, family. Here we are. Christine, Steph, Vailana. We have gathered. And we have gathered because we're going to talk about a really important topic. A topic that oftentimes we think like, oh yeah, this is kind of sorted and this is kind of handled and we got this covered. The dynamic between the masculine and feminine, but it goes so deep. There's just layer under layer under layer. And to set this up, let me tell a little story. So you guys came out as master coaches for the Fit for Service Mastermind in Sedona, and you were leading a workshop that was offering healing between the masculine and feminine. So we did one exercise, which was fantastic, which we can get into. But the exercise that I'm going to refer to was when you had the women circle up in a long oval in the center, and then you asked the men to kneel in reverence at their feet, place their hands on their feet, and just bow in reverence to the feminine. And myself, I'm pretty savvy with things, I think. I believe that I'm in touch with what's going on and what's going to be impactful. I've been a coach for a while, and I've been to a ton of these different workshops, and I thought, this is a really beautiful and sweet idea. I'm glad we're doing this. This is a lovely idea. That was what was going through my head. And so I go down, this is a lovely, honoring practice. And I was in a kind of just peaceful, honoring. And then I heard the first woman break out in tears. And not just any type of tears, but like a screaming, guttural uttering of tears. And then the next one, and then the next one, until 60 women were just weeping. And some of the men were weeping. And I went, oh my God. Like there is so much more here than we even realize. So many layers deeper. So I'll turn this over to you guys now to kind of talk about what prompted you to kind of come up with that exercise and what was actually going on. What was the reason that this was all coming forward in both the masculine and the feminine?
Well, I think a lot of things prompted it, including our own relationship and the healing that we've done with masculine and feminine energetics inside us and being committed to sacred union. And me as a woman experiencing more the feminine energetic and him as a man experiencing more the masculine energetic, and me doing a lot of work with all people, but especially women, and him doing a lot of men's work, we see how deep the wound runs with men and women, that masculine and feminine wound. The feminine has been very hurt by the masculine, and the masculine has been very hurt by the feminine. And yet at the same time, the masculine yearns for the love of the feminine, and the feminine yearns for the love of the masculine. And there's so much healing that can happen without words. And so for us, facilitating that process was about taking the words out and just allowing the energy, the simple energy of the masculine, really bowing to and revering the feminine to take over. Because sometimes when we get into the words and the processing and the talking, we can miss out on the energetics. And before we did that exercise, if you remember, we did another exercise where the men and women are on opposite sides of the room and they were stepping forward when they were relating to something like, have you been
Might as well
abused?
just,
Have you been betrayed?
I referenced that, you're referencing that. Might as well set it up and just explain that one too, because that was also a really powerful opening prior to the one that I mentioned.
Yeah. And as a bonus, we actually recorded a process for all the listeners as like a free thing so they can take themselves through it. So we'll talk about that before we end. But so do you want to talk about the setup and beforehand?
Yeah. So, and it's a really interesting question because for us, both of us, when we set these experiences up, I won't speak for Christine, but I personally am thinking, what do I need as a young person? What do I need as a young man that I didn't get? What were the role models that I needed? What were the experiences that I really had to have in order to make me feel more full and connected, not only to myself, to have a greater awareness of myself, to have deeper self-confidence, to not mask my shadows with false bravado. And that deep reverence, that honoring, my example of healthy masculinity didn't exist in my life. My grandfather, who I adored deeply, was very passive, and my father was very aggressive. And there were extremes there, and I was so confused as a kid. And revering the feminine was very difficult, or any representation of that. And so that bowing exercise was something that I needed, because I objectified women as a young man. I saw them as tools almost. I didn't understand the deep connection there, and I lost myself in that space. And having met Christine, having done deeper work on myself prior to that, a whole new dynamic was open for me in terms of I get to respect this woman for who she is, her qualities, her beauty, her wonder, but all of her. Not just the convenient parts, like all of her. And in order for me to really appreciate all of her, which I unpack and uncover every day, I have to appreciate all of me. And so that bowing exercise for me was something I did by myself in terms of visualizations, was something that I've done in previous experiences in different ways, and it opened up my heart in such a way that the intimacy was there. There was no armor around my heart anymore. And I mean, I knew that if we stay there long enough without words, because in stillness and silence there's so much power, that something would crack open and reveal itself.
Mm-hmm. And before that, so what we did is we had people, the men stand on one side and the women stand on the other side. And no matter what your sexual orientation is, if you're in a male body, your experience is different than if you're in a female body. And the point of that was we wanted men and women to just be looking at each other. And we would call out different things, different experiences, like I was saying, have you been betrayed? Have you ever cheated? Have you been cheated on? Have you been sexually abused? So on and so forth.
That moment, that moment was also just devastating.
Yes.
Yeah. Because we go through all of these different categories like this. Have you been cheated on? Have you been felt betrayed? Has, one of your parents yelled at you? And, there's a whole host of things. You're like, yep. And people move through, and some of them are emotional. Have you had experience with an alcoholic or whatever the things were that were kind of coming up? And there's myriad things it could do. But when you called, have you ever been sexually abused? And I watched.
Yep. Men and women.
And pretty much all of the women.
And that was actually, for me, I'm already getting emotional. The rest of the process was so beautiful to just be able to see people and how alike we are in our challenge and suffering and pain, and stepping forward to that one and looking the person across from me in the eyes. There was something about what was being held in my body in relation to that I just broke out sobbing inconsolably. I mean, the rest of the time it was emotional and I could feel other people's experience, but we're not speaking. One of the things we didn't do was speak to anybody. We didn't try to hold them or save them or console them from anything. You're just present, looking at, for me, I'm a woman, so I'm looking at the masculine. For those who are stepping forward, I'm seeing them in the same experience that I've had. But that one in particular, to see so many and to feel how deep that runs, and to also just be seen in that pain.
Yeah,
was massively healing for me, and a huge energetic release, and just allowing myself to grieve it.
Yeah, it really was in so many ways a shame exercise.
Yeah.
So, and I said this during the process, like the point of talking about an experience like sexual abuse wasn't to bring people back into the experience or back into their trauma. In fact, we purposely had people stepping forward across the line if that happened to them. Like, you're stepping forward into the light, into the love, into compassion, into union with others who've had that experience. And that's the way shame heals. Shame heals when we take something out of the shadows, we take something out of the secrets, we take something out of being buried deep in our past, and we bring it into light, and we say, okay, like people can see me. People can see me with this, and I'm still loved, and I'm safe, and I'm not alone. Because a lot of us with our shame, we feel so isolated in it.
Yeah, and it debilitates us. And that, for us, that exercise is it's relatability creates intimacy, and intimacy runs parallel with safety. And when we feel safe, we feel open, and we're ready to, move into the world in such a way that is more authentic to us, as opposed to moving in our shadows, which is hiding and essentially isolating again.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah, it was a beautiful setup for this. And I was one of the few who didn't step forward when they called sexual abuse of the men and the women. And I remember both witnessing everybody moving forward and just recognizing, like, I'm in the dramatic minority of humans, 160 conscious individuals, and I'm in the minority, and I'm looking around, and for me to recognize, like, how pervasive that is and how blessed I am that I wasn't stepping forward, and then to see so many of my brothers and sisters that I love, including, my partner that I love, everybody stepping to the center. It was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, this is the world that we're in. And we think, we're all so busy blaming and projecting and, I can't believe they're acting like this. Do you know what they went through?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what's inside? Before you cast all your blame and all of your judgment and start talking shit about this person, like, do you have any idea what they had to deal with and what their defense mechanisms were and how their coping strategies and what they've had to do? No, you fucking don't. You really don't. So, like, everybody giving a little bit of grace and a little bit of love to everybody, no matter how they express themselves.
Yeah. And we think so often that women often think that men don't understand or experience something, and men will think the same about women. And seeing that, I think it's important to see your mirror in the opposite sex, the opposite gender, because that's part of sacred union. That's part of healing the feminine and masculine. And if we look collectively, those wounds are really coming up right now. And for a group of people to be willing to come together and heal that within themselves, because whatever we heal inside ourselves, we're contributing to the healing of the collective. And even though the men were standing on one side and the women were on the other, I felt so much unity in that experience, and so much just family and compassion, and because we had the unique experience of facilitating, so we could see both sides. And it was incredible for me to see the men, to just see their hearts open and to see them just go into just this incredible compassion. And the women, their hearts open even more, but also their minds open to, oh wow, men go through a lot more than I even knew. I knew my sisters went through a lot of this stuff, but I think a lot of women were surprised at the amount of men that stepped forward in that, especially that sexual abuse question.
Absolutely.
What are you feeling right now, Vi?
I don't know why I got so emotional. I think an aspect of it is just so much compassion, because I know going through my own pain. So to just I feel other people a lot. So to really feel into the group and how much love I have for them. I'm not sure why I'm getting so emotional, but the thing that I really did love is exactly what you just said. One of the last thing that you guys said when you guided us through this practice was, we're so much more alike than we are different. We're so quick to point out the differences and what the other is doing wrong and to blame, but to just see each other in the same experience is so incredibly powerful and incredibly healing, as the mirror of the masculine and the feminine, like nothing else I've ever experienced before. It was a deeply profound experience for me.
And that you getting emotional there is the power of the feminine. And so many women have been told, you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, you're too fill in the blank. But that compassion and the emotion that comes through you, that's the beauty. One of the many gifts of the feminine is our ability. And it's not that men can't feel or don't feel, but there's this depth of compassion, that mother inside of us that just wants to hug the entire world. And
it was beautiful to see the men in that way too.
Yeah.
So open and so vulnerable and so compassionate of their brothers and sisters. That is really, really special. And I can say from my own personal perspective, a man who allows himself to be vulnerable is incredibly courageous. There is nothing weak about that at all. And it is a beautiful thing as the feminine to witness a man in his vulnerability.
It's that compassion, that non-judgment from the feminine when she opens in that way that cracks open our hearts. So I'll speak from my own direct experience. That has literally saved my life. Where I've had that feminine energetic be so open to me and see me in all my flaws, all my perceived flaws, in all my pain, in all my shadows, in all the quote-unquote disgusting behavior, in everything that I've been and haven't been, and still just love me for who I am beyond the superficiality of action, but not to excuse my action or to diffuse responsibility, but to just really see me. And that men need that. We witnessed in that exercise alone how many more men have experienced very deep visceral abuse than what we believe to be true. And the same is actually for females as well.
And how many men were cheated on as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the pain that's associated with those experiences, they're shared human experiences.
Yeah. And I think we also, one of the things we talked about was the king and queen archetype. And we, while they're similar in some ways, they're also different in some ways. And I think noticing too that in partnership with the masculine and feminine in union together, as if you're in your king archetype, sometimes emotion, you don't have the time or the space for emotions because it's about action. It's about keeping calm and cool and acting logically. And if you're emotional, it can actually throw off your decisions in a variety of different ways. As Joe Rogan has said, which is absolutely true, emotions are not a warrior's friend. They're not a king's friend. When you're emotional, you don't act in the most clearly and logical way. So sometimes you can become callous, and I've certainly been, at fault for that. But when you love someone deeply, like I love Vi, and then you see her cry, then it's like, there's no escape. Like there's no escape from the emotions, right? Like you can't push this off as different because you're so closely bonded together. And I think that's a sacred aspect of it, that if you are callous and either your feminine energy or the feminine energy of your partner, we have both inside of us. It doesn't matter man or woman, but whoever's in the feminine that you love, that person, like them accessing those feelings is like a wake-up call. Because I remember when we watched, Operation Toussaint about, the child slavery and sex trafficking, like I'm sure that would have deeply moved me on its own. But the fact that I was seeing my partner, like just really feeling the depths of compassion for those kids, it was like, it allowed me, like gave me the doorway for me to feel it too, in a really powerful way. So I think that's just one of the aspects of union that are really valuable, that the feminine has the freedom to completely feel everything, and then that can help the masculine aspect like see and feel and see through that lens. And then also the masculine can then step out of that and say, I feel that and I see that, but now is time for action. What are we going to do? In that case with Tim Ballard is, all right, I'm getting on the phone with Tim Ballard. We're going to make sure he comes out here. We're going to do a podcast. I'm going to gather the resources. I'm going to donate to his cause, and we're going to make this happen. But it was the perfect synergy of, she's supporting me and feeling the feeling, and then the masculine going like, all right, now I dry my tears. Now I get on my phone.
That inspires you to take action.
Exactly. And then there was nothing that was going to stop me from doing that.
And before the feminine can open up to that emotion that calls the masculine forward, she needs to feel safe, which is why in the exercise, we had the men bow to the feminine and do their process.
So we made our way back to the exercise, a long emotional journey that takes us back to the beginning of where we were starting here.
This doesn't have to be linear at all. I am the feminine, so. But it's that safety that's so important. I know for me, I'm assuming it's the same for you. For me to really open up emotionally, sexually, I have to feel safe. I have to feel like there's a safe container. Like this is a man who respects me and reveres me and can hold, and that's why we had the men hold that bowing position for so long. It's like no matter how uncomfortable my back is, no matter how much my knees hurt, I'm not going anywhere. And no matter how much you cry or whatever, like I'm still here. And that for me, not to say that we can't open up and be emotional without that, but especially in relationship and sacred union, that kind of safety gives us this incredible permission and freedom to be like, oh, I can feel everything. Because I know for me, I had to shut a lot of that down because it was just too overwhelming. Like my empathy and compassion and sensitivity runs deep. And I all went into my masculine almost as a protective strategy because it was just too much to feel.
Same.
But in our relationships, and Steph holds such a healthy masculine for me, it gives me that safety to be like, okay, I can feel everything because I'm not going to fall apart. Like there's a sturdiness there and a steadiness there that can hold me in that and can also help me with his masculine energy go, okay, what are we going to do about it? You know, and that's that beauty of that sacred union is how the feminine and masculine energies work together to create a whole different level of being and relating and acting.
Some may perceive that as a fragility in the feminine or an overpowering energy in the masculine. It's not the case in any capacity, because that ability to feel full is presence. It's living in the moment. It's not distracting from the pain of the past or the projections into the future. And that ability to feel fullness inspires me so deeply to come and ground into the space that I'm in here and now, and not get off into this, I need to feel expansive freedom. And there's an excessiveness in that, right? And it grounds me. And so I think that the power that we get to play with each other in sacred union and within ourselves, right? Because I think the outside reflection of each other in our communities and in the people that we love and care for can also be a mirror for what's happening inside, and vice versa. But there's something more tangible about the outside self. Like the inside self, it's almost abstract. It's like, what does this thought mean? And what is that thought? And this part of me and that part of me, I don't get it. But when I see Christine behaving and being in a particular way, it's more solid for me. It's more concrete for me. And I can use that as a reflection for what's happening within myself and strike a greater balance and harmony.
So in that, in getting back into that, you know, the physical act, and I know people who might be like, well, that's a little bit much, but it's not, because we both should be bowing in reverence to each other, right? And I think one of the things why people might have resistance is everybody's been trying to claim some kind of hierarchy or some kind of superiority, you know? Yeah. And, you know, for all of the good that the feminist movement has done, it's also had the dark side of it, which is that, you know, women are good, men are bad. Yeah. You know, and so that actually prevents men from wanting to do something like this, which is about this, because if we're told we're bad all the time, we're like, well, fuck you too. Yeah. You know, because I'm not bad. You know, I've done bad things, so have the feminine. Like, we've all done bad things. And so it feels unfair, and then it actually creates the distance. It actually creates the antithesis, the opposite of what the movement is really looking for, which is reverence. So if you're listening and you have some of that, you know, just track where that resistance comes from. And then recognize that this is a practice that we should all engage in some way or another. This was the very literal form of the practice, but in some way, literally or figuratively, we should bow before each other physically or energetically. And I think that's a really important aspect. Even Don Miguel Ruiz in Mastery of Love, he talks about creating a puja, which is like a worshiping ritual. And he talks about creating it for self or for other, you know, where you actually go every day, just as you would to your, you know, your gods in the Hindu tradition, which is where the word comes from. Like, you would go, you know, pay your reverence to Shiva every day, or pay your reverence to Ganesha every day, or pay your reverence to, you know, whoever. Doing that for each other can be, like, I think, a really healthy part of the process. But for someone who's never experienced that, which is where we were at, like, not only in the physical, but also in the energetic, not ever really getting bowed to, I think that's what facilitated it. It was that watershed moment of wow, you know, like, this is really happening. And then you flipped it also, which I definitely want to get into, where you flipped it, where the women were holding the men's hearts. And so talk about, you know, obviously riff off anything that I mentioned in that little part, but then also talk about how then you had us stand up, and then how you actually turned it so that it was really comprehensive and accessed kind of both both sides of reverence.
Well, I love what you said about finding that time to just have reverence and respect your partner or just anyone, honestly, because people listening know this. Anything that triggers you in another is an unresolved issue in yourself. Either it's a part of you that you haven't looked at, or it's reminding you of someone that has hurt you. Those are the only two things it usually is. And in partnership or just with men and women, there's so much we hold on to. If you're a woman whose father was abusive or abandoned you or cheated on your mother your whole life, unless you've worked through it, you're going to have some judgments and anger at the masculine. And so it's important to look at that and eventually get to the point where you can not hold this massive judgment against the masculine that continues to create separation. And same thing with men. If you had a mother or women that have hurt you and lied to you and teased you or whatever it is, you're going to have some anger at women. And if we can let that be okay, get that anger out and however we, in a safe therapeutic way, and then get to a point where we can just bow to each other metaphorically and sometimes physically, it opens up so much freedom inside of us. I know for me, because the shadow of the feminist movement is definitely a thing. Like I'm pro-human, I just want all humans to experience unity and consciousness and all of these things. But for a movement to get started at that current level of consciousness, it needed anger as fuel. That was the only way it was going to happen, because the consciousness wasn't at a state where it's like, we can do this with love. No problem. We can do this with love and forgiveness. Women had thousands and thousands of years of anger, rightfully so, against the masculine. So it needed that anger to get it going. But now I think it's up to us to up-level it, to really shift it so it's not riding on the energetic of anger, but it's more riding on the energetic of how do we heal these wounds between the masculine and the feminine. Do you want to talk about then what we did next with flipping it? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to what I said earlier around that compassion, that non-judgment, and that forgiveness as well. That hand on the heart is so symbolic. We know that symbolism is the oldest language that humanity has access to. And that hand on the heart is...
And so just to be clear, so the men stood up, the women placed the hand on the men's heart.
Yeah.
So this was the reverse of the men bowing at the feet.
Yeah, another example.
Before they did that, and this is all in the recording we made for you, the men shared something. So after they got up from bowing, they really spoke some things and took off masks and shared vulnerability. And the women just got to receive that vulnerability.
And hear them as well.
Which further, cracked everybody open. Because a lot of times we listen without hearing. So the men being able to speak in a facilitated way and the women just listen, it was more receiving and more healing. And then after that, the men were quiet and we flipped it to the women, and we had the woman in reverence put her hand on the man's heart.
Yeah, and express in reverence as well. I mean, there were very few words spoken. That was the whole point. It was really being in each other's presence without obstruction, without the busyness of life, without what's the next thing to do, without actually just feeling safe in a container where everyone could access openness and be in their own space without judgment of themselves either, and hear people crying and wallowing in pain and expressing that pain and releasing it, and that being okay, that not being a bad thing, that not being the end of the world. And the comeback from that, what does the next arc of the journey look like and feel like for every single person there? And that hand on the heart is so symbolic and so empowering of, I see you for who you are. I trust you. I love you. It's okay who you've been, and it's okay who you're becoming. That for me is super powerful and super needed in our world. If we're going to bridge any gap of not being able to celebrate difference and not being able to see each other for the similarities that we do hold, and also honor the differences that we hold.
And these two were potentially people who didn't know each other very well. For me, one of my partners was somebody that I met for the first time. So to have such a deeply moving and intimate moment with a stranger, I mean, I'll never forget that my whole life. It doesn't need to be your partner or a friend. Like, that level of intimacy can happen with anybody.
Yeah.
And I guarantee nobody that experienced that day will ever forget.
That's
how it was
what's
for
so
them.
powerful. I remember I was on the Summit boat. You might have been on that same boat
Probably.
that time. And there was a poet named Aja Monet, and she led people through an eye-gazing exercise where it was not just eye-gazing, but it was looking at the face and seeing the way that the wrinkles and the lines of the face and the shape of their experience and where they'd smiled and how many times they'd frowned. And like we went through this 15-minute guided meditation looking at each other from the eyes to all aspects of the face, the nose and the smells they've breathed, the food they've tasted, the way that everything has happened. And I remember that was at the start of the boat, but for the whole rest of the time, whenever I crossed that person, we gave each other like the biggest hug. Total stranger.
Yeah.
Didn't stay in touch after that, but it was like, oh, this person I know. Like I know their soul. Like we got to do that. And it's so quick to be able to form that. And then once you realize that you can do that with a total stranger, then you realize that you can do that with anybody. And with Fit for Service, they weren't total strangers. I mean, we've been communicating, but they were people that we didn't know that well. And those members that I went through that process with, like we'll always, for the rest of our life, have that connection.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really powerful. And it's also nice because instead of you thinking of like actual examples, Vi and I's relationship is fairly young, so we wouldn't have a ways to go back. But let's say a partnership that's been 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and you had us prompting by saying, I'm sorry for any variety of these experiences in which I hurt you. Well, you would be thinking about the literal.
Yes.
Like, yeah, that one time when you did this fucking thing. Well, but no, we weren't thinking about that because we were apologizing on behalf of the entirety of the feminine or the entirety of the masculine, which then allowed you to go to the real deep roots of it without personalizing it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that was also like really important and a brilliant thing. It's one of the reasons why I think having people separated was really key. And I actually got feedback that, at some point somebody moved to be with their partner and it really disrupted the experience. They just kind of like bounced because it was so powerful. They wanted to be with them, but it ultimately was disruptive because it's not the way it was supposed to be.
Right.
It was supposed to learn to be held by the whole group and by like the random, because man, I was going back when and it was Britt actually who had her hand on my heart, which is great. She's one of our sisters in the tribe. And she was apologizing on behalf of the feminine. I was thinking of, girlfriends all the way back to when I was 12 or people who I was in love with when I was 12, There was, I could name them actually because the imprint is so strong, but like,
Cute poet.
but like all of those rejections,
Yeah.
and I think for men, I think a lot of what we hold, and then I would love to open it up, to you, Steph, to talk about it, see if you have any kind of affinity for what I'm saying and resonance with what I'm saying. There was a time when we were young, and maybe this is just me, but I think it's probably more universal, where we were really liked somebody. And we were just hard on our sleeve, like, I really like you. Like, I like you so much. And for me, that meant I was writing them poetry, and I was like, I wanted to give them gifts, or I would pick them flowers. I was like a little romantic at heart, right? And every single, until I was 21, I would do that with everybody. And I would get rejected every time. And then somebody else who I wasn't that interested in, who would like talk to me like, hey, what's up? Blah, blah, blah. They'd be like, oh, wow, I like this guy. And so I was always with the person that I wasn't fully that interested in, because the one who I would really try, and there was so much wounding in that. And then I would see them with somebody else who didn't even really like them, treating them badly, breaking up with them, cheating on them. And I'd be like, but I love you though. And I'm pretty great, I thought, at least. I don't know. What's the deal? So the wounding of that experience of like when we really show up and say, I love you so much, and people are like, ew, gross.
Yeah.
And then that's a difficult thing for the masculine. I'm sure that happens on the feminine perspective,
does.
but we'll go through. So I'll turn that over to you, Steph, and see if was that a part of your experience as a man?
Sure. Oh, 100%. I remember with my grandmother, I would tell her, I like this girl at school. I was maybe like 10, 11, 12 years old, and she'd give me what's called a Kit Kat. You have Kit Kats
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
Give me a Kit Kat, and I'd put $2 in the Kit Kat, and I'd wrap it up in cellophane.
You put money in it?
I'd put $2. I was fucking.
What was the thought behind the money?
I don't know. I was a gift, 10, 11 years old. I was. Because, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a great question. Okay, it's a great question. I'm going to tell you why, because for me it was a form of buying love, and what really I really wanted when I look back at that and reflect was my father's love. I wanted my father's approval. I wanted his adoration, and the constant state. And that particular girl, name was Katie. It was great.
I had like 7 Katies.
Yeah, well, Katie. It's a very
4
American name.
Ashleys, 7 Katies. You know, like
A few Stephanies, maybe.
yeah, a few Stephanies, couple
Tiffany's
Sarahs.
But you know, she rejected me, and she only wanted to be friends, and it broke my heart. And you know,
Did she take the Kit Kat and the
Oh
money?
yeah, fucking oath, she took the
Oh,
Kit Kat.
man.
Of course she would. And so it was. You know, we recreate, and we speak about this a lot. We recreate the circumstances in our lives that give us an opportunity to heal those wounds, and we're so much more attentive and smarter and intelligent than we think we are when we're children. And really, I would set myself up with people that I really wanted to be with, or I was attracted to. I was attracted to something within them, only to guarantee my rejection and humiliation, because that's what I experienced with that not having the approval and the adoration of my father, you know, and unconsciously there was a tethering tied to that I wanted that approval. And so where could I seek that? And of course, being a young kid and growing up and the beginning stages of hormones as well, early, 10, 11, 12, early, but still there, maybe not even that early. And feeling that in my body, it's, where can I delve into intimacy really deeply? And then maybe experience that, not rejection, not abandonment, and actually have someone see me for who I was. Now, at the time, I didn't understand that. I didn't feel that. But that pain, and rejection's a human thing. Abandonment's a human thing. Humiliation's a human thing. But men, particularly, because we place so much of our value and worth in our utility. Like, what can we do for others? And if we're not doing the right thing and we are rejected and abandoned and humiliated, it is the worst. So we try to overcompensate in every fucking way we can. And that's been my story in so many ways, whether it's make more money, achieve more status, be with more beautiful women, be a great athlete, whatever it was, whatever could get me attention. And in the back of my mind, I was having this conversation today with a friend. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, I would actually say, and it would be conscious when I was particularly older, in my late teens and 20s, I've got to tell my dad about this. Maybe he'll really like this. And I didn't make that connection back then of what was really happening, but I was doing all of this for him. And it didn't look like it, but it was. And that, now the father wound and the mother wound, they're not formal psychological terms, but they are reflective of some personality traits and behavioral traits that play out in our lives, particularly in intimate relationships, how we give and receive love. And I gave love to always get something back and to feel whole and full, but it was never, ever enough, ever.
Yeah, and I think one of the other wounding and challenging things is, for me, I had to adopt one of two premises. One, there was a just world. And in the just world, this person that I loved would love me at least more than these other people that were treating him like shit, right? Like, I would witness what they were doing and witness what I could offer, and it did not make any sense to me. So then if it's a just world, then it's a problem with me. So it was something that was bad with me. Well, I guess I'm not good looking enough. I guess I'm not cool enough. I guess I need to do more or something, or
shame cycle.
I don't know what, it's got to be wrong with me. Or you adopt another really traumatic and damaging thing, which is the world is just fucked. It's not me, but this situation is fucked. And what women are choosing is fucked. And so there's anger projected out externally at the world or at the feminine. So there was really only, and there is the third
Which
path.
Is both.
Yeah. There is the third path. But like, for me, I was constantly toggling between those two. It was like, oh yeah, it's me, Even look, I mean, this pattern continued up even to the start of my relationship with Vailana, where I had expressed my love and she wasn't interested. And I would toggle between, well, you know what? The world's just fucked. And also, well, maybe I'm, my skin color's just a little too medium. Maybe I need to be a lot whiter or a lot darker. And if caramel's just not her flavor, and I guess I'm just unattractive to her, or I don't know. And I would just sit down and be like, I don't know. But it was still like in that thing where I couldn't escape. I couldn't actually see the truth because I think the pain bodies were so present, and the pain of the I just steered myself all too often into one of those categories, which was internally traumatized.
Yep. I think the same thing has happened for me with guys. The ones I didn't like me back. The ones that were into me wasn't into you. And then it seems like the one that I liked, they'd always go for the crazy girl, like the hot mess. And I'm like, but wait a second, I'm sane over here. Like, I'm doing my work. I just don't get it. Or they say they weren't ready for a relationship, and then I'd see a month later they were posting with their new girlfriend and they were all in love. And same thing. Either men are just fucked, they're emotionally immature, they're not doing their work, or something's wrong with me. So I think we all toggle with that, and relationships especially are such the button for that because there's so much at stake. And when it comes to the heart, there's just a lot at stake. And like Steph was saying, it really pushes those inner child buttons. The inner child can hide a little bit more in career and other things, but when it comes to relationships and intimacy, that wounding that we haven't quite gotten to, it shows up massively. And so I know for me, like getting out of that cycle was, number one, working with my anger at the masculine, whatever that was. But really what was being reflected back to me was my own self-worth issues. Like my own not really being solid in my feminine. So and you've known me for a while, I'm sure you've seen, maybe you've seen the change, but I think when you first met me, let me ask you, when you first met me, would you say I was more masculine than I am now?
100%.
Yeah. Like no hesitation.
Easily. I mean, you still
say that too.
Yeah, you still had the access to your feminine nurturing qualities.
Yeah.
I mean, I would watch you with me and other people, and you could drop into a deeply like nurturing motherly aspect, but there was also that very like, I've got to handle this shit and do this shit and like take care of this thing. And that was for someone who, wasn't particularly like, that could be very off-putting, to certain people who weren't extraordinarily confident in their own masculine, because your masculine was healthy and intimidating because you were getting shit done.
I just wasn't really balancing it out with the feminine because I believed, and I think a lot of women do, we talk about this, like it's hard for women to drop into our feminine because we think we're going to give up our power, and it's hard for men to drop into their healthy masculine because they think they're going to give up their freedom. And I was scared that if I dialed back on the masculine energy and let the feminine energy lead more, and I didn't even know what that meant, would I still be successful? Would I still be able to manage things? It felt like a demotion. Like people would tell me, especially dating coaches, they love telling me, you're too much in your masculine energy. You're going to need a beta man, or you're going to have to, be less masculine. And I heard it as, I have to demote myself. I have to let go of this part of me that's purposeful and passionate and successful and loves what I do and gets shit done, because I didn't understand the power of the feminine. I didn't understand because I hadn't yet embodied it. And it's still a dance for me. And he's helped a lot because he told me early on in the relationship, there's only going to be one man in the relationship. And I was like, well, I guess that's probably going to be you.
I got in a few things I didn't quite say in integrity. But
Yeah.
I didn't mean it to come out that way, but it did.
We were pretty sloppy.
We went pretty head to head.
Yeah, we were pretty sloppy. Yeah. But I was terrified. He was terrified to lose his freedom, and I was terrified to lose my power. And what I realized about feminine...
Sorry, but as a result, right?
Yeah.
You went deeper into that unhealthy masculine. I went deeper into unhealthy feminine.
Yeah, he got super emotional, and I was like, who is this guy?
I went back to early childhood stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
And I went into, don't make me cuddle in the morning. I can do whatever I want. I have a day to get to. Like, that was literally a fight about cuddling. I was like, fuck you. I'm not cuddling. I have to do this and this and this.
And now?
Now I get mad if you get out of bed without punching.
Yeah, you're still a bed boss though.
I am. But my point is, and I'm curious how it's been for you, Vi, that really, because the feminine has been so misunderstood lately. You know, we've lost touch with the true power of the feminine. But when I really started to study what the feminine is, and like we give birth, not just to babies, but to so many things, like the power of the universe resides within us. And this isn't a better than or less than thing. It's just really appreciating the differences. And I have learned that feminine energy has made me more powerful from an empowered place. Mm-hmm. I get more done without being depleted. And this is why I think so many women, autoimmune disorders and adrenal fatigue and thyroid this and that, like so many women are suffering from these things that are just so based on us pushing and adapting to a more masculine world. And my hope and my intention is to help women realize coming into our feminine power is not a demotion at all. And it's powerful in a different way. Yeah. And we can be even more of who we are when we let go a lot of that adaptive masculine behavior.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, for me, I've been very much in my feminine for a long time. Thankfully, I had a relationship when I was in my mid-20s that invited me to really reflect on myself and how I feel and how I respond to things. It made me deeply intimate with my emotions. And so I've probably been so strong on the feminine that my masculine's kind of just been like, boundaries, I don't know what those are. I'm just going to be passive and always give my power away. I was like totally the opposite end of the spectrum, where my coping mechanism was people pleasing to feel love, and I had been through relationship after relationship after relationship after relationship where I felt very strongly in my feminine, but I was so passive that there was always betrayal and another woman. And, my wound of not being chosen arose in every single one of them. But it got so strong, my feminine, where, a former partner of mine made a bet with me if I didn't cry for a month straight that something would happen, because it was so consistent for me to anything, to other people's emotions, to my emotions, to challenge, to movies. I was just like this, emotional mess all the time, because I think in my earlier life, I had become so good at suppressing my emotions and being the tough girl, being the girl that could keep up with the masculine, and just not ever really allowing myself to ever feel anything. So when I actually did allow myself to, it was intense.
Years and years of tears.
Yeah. So just like the tiniest little things that would happen, I'd be inconsolable. And then, fast forwarding to now, in the stability of our relationship that I feel the most safe that I ever have in my life, there's such a healthy integration of both. I definitely can't say that I sit directly in the middle. I have some aspects of my own masculine to continue to expand and work on and deepen into, but my feminine feels very empowered. Healthy, I feel like I sit in the seat of, I'm so connected with my intuition. Mm-hmm. I'm so connected with receiving energetically from partnership, from, the universe, from friendships, from other people. And my emotions are just, they just are. Mm-hmm. It's never something that I'm judging. They are always signaling something to me. It's just, I feel more like I'm the ocean, I'm not like crazy storms all the time. I'm just flowing with, whatever's happening all the time. But it's been a process of, deeply knowing myself and what the masculine and feminine means to me, and how, and the recognition that those exist within all of us.
Yeah.
Do you feel, can I ask you two questions?
Yeah, for sure.
First one is, what makes you feel safer than you've ever felt before? And the second one is, do you feel, you mentioned about balance in the masculine and feminine, and you said, I'm not quite balanced per se. Do you feel you need to be balanced?
That's a good question, because that's a judgment. To answer your first question, the reason I feel so safe is the level of devotion that we have in our partnership. And I think it extends beyond, just the construct of what marriage means, but it's actually what it symbolizes in the way that in how we relate to each other, because lots of people get married, and just because there's some kind of title or a way that, they whatever they think it's supposed to mean, it doesn't necessarily, if you're not really doing the work with your partner, that sense of stability might not really be there. So it's more so in the way that I feel with him. I feel immensely safe, and I've had all the contrast of other relationships where I've never felt safe, until coming to this one that has never been a reality for me. So I know the difference. I know the feeling. And then to answer your second question, I don't really know that it is. I think actually that now that you're pointing it out, I think that's just a judgment, believing that it's something that needs to be in balance or absolutely center. I definitely think that there are parts of my masculine in taking action to hold space for the feminine that is in me that I would love to work on. But does it need to be in perfect balance? Probably not. I think that's just a judgment.
I think the balance comes in the relationship, and the
the ebb and
synergy
flow, right?
in the energy.
Yeah.
Because I wonder
the
if
two.
otherwise we're walking around in this emotionally androgynous place that then diffuses sexual polarity,
For sure.
so to speak.
There's also a beauty in, his healthy masculine is so strong, and we're so present with each other on a daily basis, so present and deep with each other that, that energy is definitely feels like it's if you think of us as a union and a unit, like that is very much an aspect of me, and he's incredibly wonderful at supporting me in taking more action.
I think talking about polarity, and I think this is in union, I think this is a cool topic to get into, and a couple of things, just my own experiences and relationships, and ultimately where I think we can guide the conversation is now some practical tips for union and practical tips for self-healing and examples from relationships on how that can work. I remember when, I had a former partner, and I'll leave all the names out, just even though I'm pretty open with everything, but I'll leave all the names out. Former partner, very inner feminine. And that was great because it allowed me to be very in my masculine. And so it worked. However, I was in the process of building an empire. I wanted to build an empire. And so having someone that was in her feminine, but not in like the, using her divine intuition to help me build the, it was kind of like, it was kind of like a muse for sure. And also the kind of like the wild feminine that was, tumultuous. It seemed like I this isn't the right. I need someone who's has enough masculine that can help me build this, that can watch this aspect of the empire while I'm focusing on this one. Like I need someone who can access her king energy, and that wasn't available. So I was like, this isn't working for where I'm going in my life. I need someone with at least a little bit more king energy. Next partner, way more king energy, and then so much of that masculine energy that I had to then actually be in my feminine a lot and hold the feminine, which is an uncomfortable place for me, for us to have polarity, or be in the hyper masculine. So like I had to create space, because there has to be space for there to be attraction. If you're the same, it just fizzles, right?
Yeah.
So I could be really in my feminine and light all the candles in the bath and give like a luxurious massage and be like in that super soft, feminine, nurturing. And that felt pretty good, actually, even though it was not a place where I wanted to stay all the time. Or I had to be like fucking raging bull, Terminator, Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo, all in one, like Chuck Liddell raising his arms like a conquering hero. So to be that masculine, and then there was polarity in that. So, and that was ultimately, a challenge as well. So finding someone that, Vayu sit kind of naturally skewed towards the feminine, just as I'm naturally skewed towards the masculine. So let's say I'm 60 masculine, 40 feminine in my most natural. Now that 40 can become 100 or that 60 can become 100, but my natural propensity is to be at that maybe 60-40 call. You can't put numbers to it. And you're kind of, flip-flopped in that in a way. So it fits in this like really beautiful way that's really comfortable, where I'm comfortably in my masculine most of the time. You're comfortably in your feminine. And while we can cross over and do it, we don't have to. And I think that to me, as far as like practical guidance for union, is finding someone that you don't have to work to get into polarity. Because I'm not comfortable being at that blistering barbarian 100% masculine. I'm also not comfortable being at my 90% feminine. I mean, I'll go there. I can touch the extremes, but to reside there, it's too much work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really work. So that would be, I guess, some of my practical advice for finding the polar match.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we didn't fit together that well in our balances in the beginning.
No.
Yeah.
No, there was something, we spoke about this earlier, there was something greater at play for us because we didn't fit very well in those balances, because I had to do what you were doing. I either had to be in my hyper feminine or my hyper masculine. And I've got range, and I pride myself on range. It's something I'm very deliberate about, but I don't always want to be there. I want to be where I'm natural. And Christine would want to be where she's natural, because that's homeostasis. That's what every living organism strives for. But we weren't, but there was something greater. There was a greater force. I think this is part of what represents sacred union, right? This greater force at play that's unknown. It's fucking mysterious. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it is.
Something just pulled us together. I mean, for us to meet on opposite sides of the world, for us to have to legally get married after 2 months of knowing each other. And so we were legally married before the shit really hit the fan. And then it was like, well, there's no
We literally had the conversation. We literally said, if we weren't married, I'd be back in Australia right now. Like, this is not happening.
Yeah, because we were really bumping. I think we were both hanging on to old ways of being. And I, especially for being single for so long, I was scared to let go of that mask, because I had used my masculine energy to protect myself. Like, it had been my guardian in so many ways. And so I think I was scared to give that up. And it was also navigating, creating polarity where he came into my world. He didn't know anyone. He didn't have friends here. He was building his business, and I was in a much different place. So navigating all of that was, it was difficult. And so practically some tools, like we got outside support, because I think we came into the relationship a little personal growth arrogant.
Spiritually
arrogant. A little spiritually arrogant. Like, we've done so much work. This is going to be easy. And then it was like, it's not fucking easy. So that outside support
I still think that sometimes.
Hey.
No, about me. I've done the work. What I don't need to do anymore.
Yeah.
What do you mean, hey?
Yeah, I thought you were talking about it wasn't easy.
No. It's a lot. It's smooth
it's
now,
super.
darling.
It's very easy now.
Challenges, yes, but difficult, no.
And especially for people that are starting the relationship, I would advise get outside support early, because you're laying foundations, you're laying patterns. We were very lucky to get some outside support early to not get into bad habits.
But it has to be good outside support.
Yeah, it has to be good outside support.
Because the thing I've seen a lot of fucking shit outside support, and talked to a lot of people, and especially listening in on Whitney's calls too, because she talks to people.
Yeah.
And so many people have such bad ideas that they're propagating, and such bad advice that they're giving people, like keeping people in situations that clearly don't work, and just collecting that, consulting paycheck or whatever the fuck they're getting from that. There's like so many self-serving biases, and also misnomers and personal projections. Like, outside help, absolutely, but you better make sure it's good, or it's going to do
if it's not bringing you closer or getting you to clarity, then find someone else. It's not working. And that outside support can look like programs. It can look like books you're reading together. It can look like listening to something like this. There's lots of ways to do that, because you have your blind spots in relationships. And then for us, we do certain things, like in arguments, like when we know we're in a loop with something, and this helps keep the polarity, because basically our old pattern was we get into arguments, I'd either collapse into my wounded feminine or go into my overbearing masculine, and he'd do usually
I get pretty ethnic. In other
Yeah,
words, I
you
just
get-
shout and scream and get very Greek Italian and loud and aggressive. And
Yeah, and I'm like raised in a German Catholic home. We just hold all our feelings inside. So
Same.
So pattern interrupts. Like when we get into a pretty nasty argument, he'd do this thing where we were just in a loop. I'd either ask him to do it or he'd do it. He'd lay on his back and put his feet over his head like he was going to do a shoulder stand and just have his butt up in the air and would have to talk to me from that position.
if I really wanted to get funny, I'd pull my pants so she'd see my
Wow.
butt.
Yeah.
Because when your butthole's straight up in the sky.
You're not doing
Like-
much but laughing or being
You're so
repulsed. One of the two.
Yeah, but
State change.
It was a state change, and
time.
it broke because that's what I think. So many couples, you get in the same argument, you get in a loop, you get in a cycle, and you need to have
perpetuates.
ways to get out of it so that you can actually change the perspective you're having the conversation from.
And to put some research behind that, I know you'll continue, but the Gottman Institute speaks, and they've done, I mean, they're amazing. If you haven't heard of them, the Gottman Institute is all about relationships, but there's what they've tested that works is to break the patterns. If you're caught in that loop, both of you go for a walk at least 40 minutes. So you're releasing some endorphins and dopamine and all of that. On that walk, either be blank, just pay attention to where you are. Don't think about the argument or what you're going to say or how you're going to do it. Listen to an audio book that's completely irrelevant. Come back and read a book or a magazine, something really light, nothing intense, no personal development or anything like that. Wait at least 60, 70, 80 minutes and then come back together. And that has proven to work really well in reconciliation and coming from a different place.
But if you have any abandonment triggers, you have to have agreements that
Yes.
like I'm leaving for a walk for an hour and I
Yeah.
will be back, because anyone with that abandonment button is going to be triggered, which brings me to the next thing I wanted to bring up.
Or the
which-
former thing, which
Yeah.
is take your pants off and put your butthole
Oh
to
my
the sky.
gosh.
Right.
Because
He
then you're
usually
right
kept
there
his
with
pants
them. If
on.
they
He
got big
usually kept his
abandonment
pants
issues.
It's all there.
Usually the pants stayed on.
That
Every now
can,
and then, depends how bad it got.
that can be a huge source of conflict that I experienced in a prior relationship. Like talking about attachment styles,
Yeah.
I definitely have. I have the deep need to take some space to myself to understand. To just understand what I'm actually feeling, to come from a place where I can consciously have a conversation with someone, to not be reactive. I also do the total shutdown and like numb out, and I get very monotone, and I'm just kind of like, so taking that space for me was important. But for somebody who has the abandonment wound or they have an anxious attachment, their desire is to fix it in the moment. So having those two styles can be incredibly conflicting.
Yeah.
So the time agreement is, it's nourishing for both people, because, the more avoidant person is actually getting their needs met, and the person that's more anxious doesn't feel like they're losing their love. They know that they're coming back. They know there's going to be a conversation, and it's a little bit
Create certainty.
Yeah. I think the two last things I'll say about like the practical, or what's really helped us and what we've seen help couples that we work with, is one, agreements that you make after the argument's over. So that like we have agreements about what goes or doesn't go in an argument. Like it would really scare me if he hit the wall or something like that. Like, and so that's an agreement. Like you can't like hit something because that's going to really jar me. Like you can wave your hand in the air, but when you hit something and the sound is loud, that triggers my trauma. Like we have an agreement that you can't like leaving to go for a walk with a clear agreement, but just storming out of the room or leaving the house. Like, so we form these agreements about arguing when we're in a healthy state.
Place, right? When we're connected to each other.
And we really, and this sounds counterintuitive to polarity and great sex, but knowing your partner's inner child wounding, like knowing their attachment style, knowing their wounding, so helps with arguments, and then also helps with polarity, because since I know his wounding and he's been vulnerable with me about what really hurts him, and because he has the awareness of when we get in an argument, he's self-reflective and is like, this is what this is triggering in me. Mm-hmm. And we have the conversations about this is what this is triggering in me versus this is what you're doing that's triggering me. Massive.
taking ownership.
Taking that kind of ownership, and also like fighting fair. Since he knows my wounding and I know his, there's certain things I won't do in an argument or disagreement, because I know that's just going to make his little boy feel rotten. and ashamed and shut down. And he knows the same for me.
The more you do that, and the more I do that for you, we do that for each other, the more trust and intimacy we build with each other. And and it becomes easier to be more vulnerable and easier to be more open and very real with each other as opposed to hiding and shutting down.
And because the little boy and little girl feel safe inside, and they're not like...
They're ready to party.
They're ready to just be at rest. And then the adult self, the sexual side's like, all right, like things are good. Like I'm not triggered right now, like game on. And so it helps build that passion in a relationship.
There's some truth to that. Like a way to, I think not just a woman's sex, but everyone's sex is through their heart and through feeling safe. A way, when your heart's open, your sex is open.
Yeah.
That's a big, and so it's also, I want to say an incentive, but it is. And it's an inspiration for me to continually work on how can I be this safe beacon of truth for you whilst also honoring myself. And that's the balance point, and that's my growth edge too. So how do I do both? Is it possible? Let me explore it. Let me be really curious about that. And the result generally is this massive openness between us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of the things that really came to my attention in a little tiff that Vi and I got in recently is it could have been really, really short-circuited and circumvented if instead of, because both Vi and I have a streak of perfectionism. We don't like to be wrong. So
I can't relate to that.
We like to be the one that's right. And so we can lock horns in this way of like using and we're very smart and spiritually adept. So we'll be trying to describe what someone says and, well, that's, don't tell me that's what I did. What are you, so we'll start using all the language and all the tips, and then we'll use all of our spiritual tools to actually lock horns, and we're being like fucking spiritual manipulative lawyers with each other, like trying to prove that we're right. But like ultimately the resolution is like, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
What do you need right now? And it would have been like, oh, okay, well, I need to be heard, or I need, I feel like I need an apology, and maybe need's not the right word, but what do you want right now? Like, what is it that you're asking for with your emotions?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, maybe you need to be heard. Maybe you want an apology. You want an acknowledgement of what it was. You want a modification of an agreement going forward, a deeper understanding of self. And you start to lay out what you actually want. And like, okay, like let's go through all this stuff. But it's so easy to get immediately triggered into whether you're right or wrong. And then it's our own shame, it's our own perfectionism, our own desire not to be the one that hurts somebody and not to have that be our fault. Because if you really love somebody, one of the hardest things to deal with is that you hurt them.
Yeah.
And so if you can say, no, I didn't hurt you, you hurt yourself, and then that becomes like a way that we can be exculpable from our own guilt, and we can get locked in that, and it could extend something that could have been over in 10 minutes into 10 hours, rather than just like, all right, so something's activated here. I clearly activated it intentionally or not, and let's see how we can resolve this. It's hard to do in the moment, but if we can, I really feel like that moment, because we blew this trivial thing up, which could have been 10 minutes into literally 10 hours, and she did take a nice long walk. It was like a 6-hour walk.
I spent time out on the land.
Yeah.
So, but that, and it ultimately didn't really even resolve until we were back, until we could actually talk through it. But I think that was the final conclusion. Like, how could we have actually circumvented that? And it had just been that understanding of what the person who is initially triggered, like what they need, what are they really looking for in this situation?
There's a surrendering to that. Right? And surrendering isn't resignation. Surrendering is, I'm going to be open to a different reality as opposed to what I'm attached to and what I think needs to happen in order to feel better, because I'm trying to mask my wounds or my shadows or my pain, my own pains. And, in those moments of vulnerability, we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to show our pain. We don't want to wear our heart on our sleeve, because there's a risk of further rejection. That person's already amped up in front of us. They're already angry. They're already upset. And once all the dust settles, and you said this a moment ago, ultimately we just want to be seen, accepted, respected, appreciated, heard, understood. That we really just want that. And we can give that to each other. I know that you're amazing at this, and I'll really give you this. You do this so well. You forgive and release. You feel, forgive and release so quickly, and you just what's the word? You just fall into this, you allow yourself to fall into this space that says, yep, I thank you for that. That's all I needed. I'm good to go.
I'm done. But that's because you own.
Yeah.
Sure. There's a dance there. There's a dance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. It's in, John Gottman, who is one of our teachers on relationship and marriage, and studies relationships and can tell within the first 10 minutes of meeting a couple if they're going to last or not. He talks about...
It's a lot of pressure.
I know. I'd be so nervous. I'd blow it. I was like, we're doomed. But he says,
to be on.
You don't measure the success of a relationship or its longevity or its health on how often a couple argues. You measure it more on how quickly they can repair. Not forget about it and brush it under the rug, but repair the argument, learn from it, make agreements, get to that place of owning and forgiveness. And that was such a relief to me when I heard it, because I think I had in my head that, you're not supposed to fight. I knew that that is normal, but especially in a conscious relationship, you should not be fighting a lot. And we'd have these knockdown, drag out fights, and I'd be like, oh. But what I've seen is, and especially the longer we've been together, one, we don't have a lot of the same arguments, and two, we repair so much quicker. And so I think that's an important thing for all of us to keep in mind. Like, don't be afraid of the arguments, because they're going to come, and it's how you grow. You don't just evolve a relationship through great sex and all intimate conversations and gazing into each other's eyes. You heal and grow in a relationship through the arguments, because that's when the stuff's bumping up against each other.
And how
That's
you deal
when
with
you-
those.
Yeah.
That's when you have the
arguments.
ability to choose something different.
Yeah.
Yep.
And to show your own evolution.
There's looking back at past relationships, that was absolutely the thing. And just as Steph honored Christine, I want to honor you as well. One of the beautiful things is when you can get back to a zero state where there's no harboring resentment, and there's not going to be something that's brought up from the past. Like, remember that time in Tahoe when and all of these things just keep getting resurfaced because it's not ever actually worked through. And you get back to like a full zero state where you're not harboring so much stuff from the past emotionally, and you feel it. And I think that's it's so nice to know that that's ultimately where we're going to arrive, because it sets my nervous system at ease in such a great way. And I remember, with past paramours, I had one that was particularly tempestuous and would throw up this massive fit, and just massive, like chaotic fit. But quickly, as the storm would come, the storm would pass, and there would be no residuals. Like it would be like, and the tears come, and then now it's over. And in a lot of ways, that was like way healthier than the mild bickering, passive aggressive. We never really quite resolved this. And I'm like, you sure you're okay?
Yeah, little digs here and there.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, no, it's good. We're good. Like, but I don't really know that we are, and so it was way less dramatic and way less tempestuous, but like we would never get back to zero. And so slowly over time, shit would stack.
Builds.
And there would just be this giant stack, and they would say, let me go to Article B from from 2016, and I see here that I'm still holding this grievance. What do you have to say about this?
I love that it has a British accent to it too.
That's where, like, the something that I found so healthy, and to just touch on something that you shared, is if you have the emotional competence enough to feel into yourself, to take a moment to breathe, and to come forward in the conversation with ownership. It invites the entire conversation to no longer be about blame or trying to be right. It's like, even if, there's still things you're holding on to, I can see where, how I said this must have come off in a certain way, and I can definitely do better there. As soon as one person starts taking ownership, the entire energy of the conversation shifts. Sometimes that's really difficult to do. Sometimes the energy is a little bit too heightened, and some sort of pattern interrupt, like taking your pants off and doing yoga poses or, whatever it might be. Maybe that's necessary, but, to be a self-resourced.
I think it's advised.
Yeah. You're going to start a trend.
Try it until it doesn't work. Let's just say that.
We barely have to use it anymore. It broke us out of a cycle.
I can't remember the last time I used it.
Out of a cycle.
Yeah.
I don't think I've used it this year.
We're for
So
sure
that's the
using
key
that
to
next.
success.
Yeah.
Everybody, naked yoga poses.
Naked yoga poses.
Cool.
But yeah, the ownership piece, and it's actually, in my own experience of it, it feels soothing to me, because if I'm owning my part in it, it's like all of my walls are coming down, and what I really desire in those, you know, moments that are conflicting is intimacy. What I really want is to be close. What I really want is to be on the same team and to love and bridge that gap of separation that got created through a trigger. And so like that first step of taking ownership piece has been huge for me, and just so easy to just calm things down for a moment to actually have conscious communication.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Remembering that you both want the same thing. And I think our partners will definitely give us the opportunity to exercise muscles we need to exercise. Like, for example, in our dynamic, you know, like we've established Greek Italian, fiery, and I can sometimes collapse in that. So I won't be the person that fights back. Like I used to tend to just kind of hold it inside, put it in Article A, Section B.
We'll refer to this later.
Yes. But just collapse and go more into that victim role, because I don't have that fighter, yeller energy in me. And so a lot of times when he'd be in that dynamic, I just collapse, and my little girl would get triggered, and it'd kind of go into a pouty energy. And what I've learned is like him having that in him gives me an opportunity to exercise my empowerment and really speaking my truth. And so now if that happens, and it's happening more rarely because I'm, doing my end, when he does that, I'm like, this isn't what we do. This isn't the kind of relationship we have. We're not going in this direction. And I stand there in my healthy feminine, like, because by collapsing, I wasn't calling him forward or myself forward.
I was staying in extremes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The call forward for me was to move out of extremes, because I don't want to overpower someone that is being patted. It's like a thug walking up to an 80-year-old woman on the street or an 80-year-old man on the street and just punching them from behind. It's like that type of energy, you know. It's like there's no satisfaction in that. There's no equity or equality in that. But what it did do was call me forward out of my extreme ways and to actually stop and listen, because my upbringing was very volatile and violent. And that was my conditioning. It's either extreme or it's either really hold back, be passive, be meek, hide from the world, or be super fucking aggressive and fight really hard and make yourself really big. And that pattern played out in intimate relationships. I didn't want to do that with Christine. So when she started stepping into her healthy expression, it gave me an opportunity to see myself differently and actually choose, like almost like a meta-analysis, and actually choose, do I really want to be this? Is this type of person the man I want to be? Like, what does this even mean? And that coming into a healthy conversation and resolution and connection, intimacy, like what you mentioned earlier, Vi, can actually be attained and felt and embodied. That's special.
And that's part of sacred union, like helping each other heal your past, but you're calling each other forward into the future and the vision that you want to create together that isn't based on your old dynamics. Because, David Deida talks about the different stages of relationships. And if you really want to get to what he calls stage 3 relationship, you're no longer in this just bouncing off each other's past and in the dynamics that your parents maybe had, and you're evolving into something new. So it's calling each other forward into sometimes the unknown, but into
often
like what what you want to evolve into. And that's an exciting part, a tough part sometimes, but an exciting part. And you've been really great with that with me too.
But in doing so, I'm noticing that we're both healing generational trauma. And it's that generational and childhood trauma that impacts us and keeps us in a loop of behaving a particular way because our brains are pattern recognizing machines. And with respect to trauma bonding and trauma responses, we want to keep ourselves safe. We're going to push away anything that feels unsafe or replicates or resembles anything that was once unsafe or that was very traumatic for us. But we get stuck in those cycles, and it deeply embeds in the grooves of our brain. It becomes our norm. And I can almost sometimes feel my brain changing when I'm doing things differently. And I know that's probably me just being, poetic about it. But I feel different in my physiology because I feel the hormonal release change when we do something that's been very different to how I've done it in the past.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that, there's lots of studies I talked about on my podcast with Wim Hof. There's lots of studies that show that generational trauma through epigenetic transfer is a real thing. Yeah. And these patterns, like, it's not just your skin color and your hair color and your eye color and these passive and active, like, basic genes. There's the epigenetic triggers that also transmit, and there's a lot of really good research about that. And we do have the opportunity to switch those triggers, and so that we don't pass anymore. We can't do anything about our hair color gene, not yet. I mean, I don't know, maybe we'll talk to Dispenza about that, but who cares? But like those other triggers that really count the most, we can shift. And speaking of shifting, I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about sexuality in a sacred union and in a relationship. Because I think one of the things, this is a sensitive issue, because as we started, there is a lot of sexual trauma in both men and women individually. So, we're barreling into sex, not really knowing what's driving us in a lot of ways, not really knowing what's there. And then things are evolving, and the evolution of those things evolving can also be confusing as well. Well, I thought you were into that. Well, I was for a little while. And so, like, for example, there was, in a previous partner, she was very much slut shamed her whole life. Everybody projecting that, oh, you slut, you slut, you slut. So when we first got together, she liked being called a slut. It was erotic for her. She got to claim that and be like in that and be wild in that expression of being that. And that was something that was like, wow, this feels really freeing. I feel like liberated and empowered in that. And then like at a certain point, it was like, yeah, don't call me that anymore. I was like, what happened? And I was, but we didn't have the understanding at that point.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh, well, I just healed that thing.
Yeah.
So like, this isn't what's needed. And so sex is this interesting playground where if we're sensitive and we're honoring, we can use the container to actually move forward and advance and heal rather than pattern trauma. Even if the behavior is a little wild, or even if it's not about what you're doing, it's about why you're doing it and how you're doing it and whether you're listening to the person to do it. Because like, that's, I think, the big key thing to understand. It's not like you can only have sex this one way and it always has to be with a 30-minute massage. And it always has to be like, no. But it has to be with consciousness and awareness of self and an understanding of what's going to release a pattern and also what's going to actually compound a negative pattern.
Yeah. I think so many of us that have had any kind of sexual trauma really disconnect during sex and don't even realize that we're doing it, and it becomes more performance than it does actually being satisfying, like on all levels. Maybe on sort of a physical level it can be, but really satisfying on that emotional level and feeling connected to the other person. Because that's one of the coping strategies for sexual abuse is you just leave your body. You can be there and you can be in the act of sex, and it can be something that bonds you to a person, especially if we're craving intimacy. Often we'll use sex because we think, well, that's the way to be close to someone. If we aren't willing to really take down the walls and have that emotional intimacy, it's like, well, at least I can have sex. But if a part of us really isn't there because there is that abuse and there is that trauma and we're disconnecting, then it almost reinforces the trauma in certain ways.
Playing out the same pattern of disassociating from the body.
Yeah.
And the other side to that is if you carry a stronger masculine energetic, you'll want to be overpowering in sexual interaction, and you'll want to dominate. And sometimes you'll want to dominate in a very unhealthy way. You want to take the power to make sure that your power is not taken away as well. And that can be for a man or a woman. It presents itself in different expressions.
I think when we're talking about sex in relationships or just in general, having a healthy sexual relationship with ourselves is always the first step. Because again, we can project that onto another. This person is going to be my sexual healer. This person is going to make me feel sexy or validated or enough or whatever. And I know for me, I had to do so much of that sexual healing for myself and really look at how I disconnected or how I performed or how I used sex to feel close when I wasn't getting the emotional intimacy. And also how often I didn't ask for what I needed or speak up. And that, like, for that woman you were talking about was like owning that slut. For me, a big step was like just saying, that doesn't feel good. Like, I don't I don't like that. Where there's so many times where I would just kind of be like, well, this feels good to other women that I see in movies, so it should feel good to me. So I'll just pretend that it feels good, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so it's just that awareness of like where we go during sex, what we're using sex for, like what wound it's activating, what wound it's trying to fill. And then in a healthy relationship, it can be something that where a lot of healing transpires, because true sexual intimacy, I mean, talk about that requires tremendous vulnerability
and
trust and surrender, like especially for the feminine, like a massive surrender.
And we've all fucked it up.
Yeah,
Most definitely.
Like I mean, I've definitely been a part of the healing process, and certainly like, Vi, you got me as a more mature and wiser and more sentient being than my former lovers, and because there was a lot of a mixed bag. I had my own emasculation issues and my own desire to validate myself through my sexuality that a lot of people had to deal with. I also had a sweet, tender, like loving stableness, and everybody was contending with my stuff as I was contending with their stuff, and overall I think it was a net positive, but it was certainly a mixed bag. But I certainly learned a lot along that journey. And, it's a hard thing to look back at situations because, there's nobody that I was with that I don't still love in some way. It's hard to look back and be like, dang, like really could have done that one better. And, but, we do the best we can at the time we're there. And, sometimes vocalizing that to the person makes sense. And sometimes it's just, you gotta connect and speak that to spirit and just, give yourself that forgiveness for not acting in the way that you would now.
Yeah.
Back then, in those containers.
Yeah. Two of our teachers, Jonathan and Heike, who we did some sexual somatic work with, one thing that they really teach and that we believe too is that part of healing trauma is experiencing pleasure. So a big part of healing sexual trauma is pleasure, but pleasure that feels safe is, I guess, the best way to put it. And so in an intimate relationship,
and deliberate,
yeah.
There's an intentionality that comes with that.
Absolutely. And so in an intimate relationship, sometimes in the experience of sex or anything intimate physically, emotion can come up. And what I'd say to anyone who's with a partner they feel safe with, like, let that emotion come up, feel it, and then allow yourself to move into pleasure. Because that's what starts to rewire some of that sexual trauma and helps you start to, because the body so confuses pain and pleasure sometimes. And so to be able to feel whatever's coming up, the tears and the memories or the triggers or whatever it is, and have your partner hold that space, but not necessarily stop pleasure. It doesn't have to be the act of sex, but something that moves you into pleasure after that. So your body can start to feel like, okay, it's safe for me to receive pleasure.
Like
It's dangerous. Yeah.
And pleasure can be even an affirmation or a confirmation from your partner. And this is why conscious relating with an awareness and in a way that is just sacred, whatever you deem to be sacred and really important to you can be so beautiful. One of the ways that we really release trauma is through loving presence, empathetic resonance, and radical self-acceptance. And when you provide that for your partner and they're seen in their most vulnerable state, they're not only physically naked, but they're emotionally raw and naked as well. There's something profound that happens that we can intellectualize it all we want, but until you're in that experience, there's that shift that you feel. Again, it's like you feel your brain rewiring. You feel
in your body.
You feel your psyche just changing and shifting, becoming more malleable. It's just this. It's a beautifully profound feeling. It's that loving presence. It's. I want to say it's almost everything.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up with. I want to go through and let's talk about, the men will talk about the one step for healing, one piece of advice for healing the inner masculine. Women, here you can talk about one step for healing the inner feminine. And then we'll give our, one tip for one idea or concept for, how to bring that into union. We'll just allow spirit to move through and allow us to choose one, because we're all people who could probably come up with a listicle of 10 or 12 and do that. And before we do that, let's go pee.
So the things that I would offer in healing the feminine that have been pretty massive for me, one is, part of feminine energy is receiving. And something that I had such a challenge around, I think because I was more in my masculine as a younger woman, is, always feeling like I got it, I've got it together. I don't need anything from everyone. I got this. And there's something to blocking, abundance, relationships, so many different aspects of life when you're not in a comfortable place of receiving. And just like we saw, at the beginning of the podcast where we were talking about the exercise with the men and women, the women were invited to receive honor and reverence from the masculine. And I'd imagine that for many of them, not only were they experiencing something that they have never received before from the masculine, but how much do they actually allow themselves to receive? I'm positive at least a few people were probably uncomfortable with that sense of, giving love and energy and honor and reverence to them. So
I had at least 8 people come up and tell me that exact thing.
Yeah.
That it was really uncomfortable. I just wanted them to stand up because it was too much for me to receive that.
And it's this weird false, I think for me, it was like a false humility. Like, I'm okay. I don't need that. But you're really blocking the energy flow of allowing somebody else to be the giver and be the receiver. And I think that's hugely a feminine aspect. So that's definitely something that I would offer that's helped me in my own process. And then the other one is, in moments that you are having pain or challenge, can you treat yourself like the loving, nurturing mother that you wish you had, that you didn't have when you were a child? What would your loving mother do in a situation? Would she tell you to get it together and be quiet? Or do you actually need to be held and tell that it's okay to feel your emotions? Be told that it's okay to break down and go through anything that you're experiencing, and know that it's okay. Know that it's valid. Know that you are loved. Can you be in relationship with yourself in that way and really hold compassion and empathy and forgiveness?
I'll go next, and then leave it to the master coaches of our experience in Sedona and in life to bring us home with it. But I think for me, and this is really a big one for me, is I had a lot of criteria about what it meant to be a man, which was wrapped up in the masculine. So I thought that the concept of man was inexorable from masculine, and to be a man was a very lofty goal and a large list of things that were required. I had to be the strongest, I had to be the best, and there was all of these external, extrinsic criteria to validate my own manhood. And there is nothing that can validate your manhood that's external. It is an internal thing. Mm-hmm. It is you with you, and so that actual understanding means that instead of measuring yourself based upon all of these external factors, you just have a deep knowing of self. And then starting to cultivate that and practice that is, I think, a really key concept. Like, if you want to cultivate your inner masculine, don't worry about all of the things you need to accumulate in the cars and stuff. Have that if you want. Have fun. Have a fucking blast. Get whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Build all the sandcastles in the world. Know that the sands of time are going to be, eroded by the ocean when it comes in and takes away, this life and whatever. Fine. But build the sandcastles and love it. Enjoy it. However, to really build the masculine within you that really counts, you have to focus on the internal practices. And there's so many ways to do that. One of which that's quite simple, I talk about it all the time, is if you want to cultivate the masculine and you see a freezing cold plunge of water and you know that there's going to be benefits from getting in that cold, if you want to cultivate the masculine archetype within you, you have to be the one that is willing to say like, oh yeah, that looks cold. I'm going in. And it's not only that you decide to go in, it's how you go in. Are you going to go in gasping and breathing and flailing about? Or are you going to go in like, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to breathe however much is necessary, but I'm going to slide in. And you're not going to get it right the first time, and you're going to talk yourself out of it 100 times. This isn't about judgment. This isn't about, did I prove that I was a man today? No, you're not proving anything. You're training. You're cultivating that aspect of masculinity every time you go through a process like that. And every time you do that, you'll know a little bit deeper inside that like, yeah, I have this and I am willing to do this. So when you have to go into something emotionally difficult or go into something spiritually difficult, you'll have the training. You'll be prepared in a much deeper way. So that's the tip that I would encourage everybody to cultivate, that inner masculine, and also heal that understanding that says it must be external and it's comparative, because it's not. None of that shit actually even matters at all. They're all just sandcastles. And then as far as approaching and stepping into relationship, I think the most important thing is to be as steady as you can. And this is really the ideal, because the more erratic you are, the more unsafe everybody's going to be. And this is the hardest thing. And this was really hard for me, because I would be steady, hold it, grin and bear it, tough it out. Fuck, I can't handle it anymore. And then everybody's like, I don't know when that's coming. Like, when is that thing coming? Like, and so everybody's like, things seem okay, but I'm not sure, because I don't know if he's holding. So steadiness doesn't have to mean that you're actually like homogenous all the time, but it's that you're not repressing and then exploding in a way, so that if you're having little blips like, hey, I'm really mad about that, it happens like immediately, and then you're like, okay, sorry about that, I'm over it. So that there's no like anticipation of some big surprising erratic thing, because that's going to really erode the safety in the relationship and actually cause the contraction in the feminine. So, if you feel something, feel it, move through it, let it go out, do all of the strategies to mitigate kind of the harmful aspects of anger. Anger is very pointy and it's very jagged and it's very easy to cut. Never use names, like don't call any names. Those things stick. Even after an argument, even if voices were a little raised and whatever, if there's not that defining word or that defining moment, like that punch in the wall, all of it just kind of like fades into the whitewash of your memory. And you're like, yeah, we got fucking into it. But if there was like that one word, you're like, well, that word's like stuck in your brain, or that one moment, or there's that dent in the wall that's there for like the next week. And I've punched my own walls, and I've fallen victim to all these. But I think through experience, it's sharing immediately in the moment and, moving through that. So there's as few surprises as possible, and then mitigating the damage of, some of the harmful aspects of any anger, like words or like things that could actually last beyond when the resolution of the issue comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. Christine?
So many things for the feminine. I'm actually going to speak about discernment, because one of the misconceptions I had about feminine energy that turned me off to it a bit is that the feminine's so flowy, can't make a choice, and like it's unreliable. And although there's definitely flow to feminine energy, I think the more accurate thing to say is the feminine energy is very adaptive, almost to our demise in some ways. We can overly adapt. But we also have this incredible power of discernment. The feminine is so discerning. Our intuition is so spot on. And I really encourage my sisters to cultivate this power of discernment that doesn't come from pro-con lists, and it doesn't come from rational thinking. That's more the masculine way. It's this inner knowing straight from you to the divine that you just know. Yes. You just know in an instant, and to trust that, because it's very different than the constructs of the mind and the way we talk ourselves in or out of something. Steph says something I love. He says the masculine leaves too early and the feminine stays too long. The unhealthy. Sorry, let me say that again. Roll back.
Do it.
The unhealthy masculine leaves too early, and the unhealthy feminine stays too long. And that's when the feminine's not in the power of discernment. You know, she's staying too long because she's, whether it be a relationship or job or whatever it is, in a pattern, because she's not using the power of that discernment. She knows, but maybe because it doesn't make sense or it's not acceptable or everybody else tells her she should do something differently, she doubts that and moves away from this incredible power of discernment and intuition. So I think as women, as we tap more into that power of discernment that leads to our intuition really opening and cultivating, that's where we get all our answers. And that's when we're able to really lead from that queen. You know, that's in so many ways the archetype of the queen, to be able to really discern and be like, this way, or this is a yes, or this is a no, and just have that clarity and not even need a reason why. It's just like, I just know.
Yeah.
I just know.
I have and I want to lob this out here because I had an interesting download about intuition. So all the time, like, where does intuition come from? Like, what is it? What is it actually happening? Are we tapping into some collective? Does our soul know things? And I think all of this is possible. But I had another hypothesis, and I think all of this is real, actually. But this other hypothesis was really interesting. So there's an actual phenomenon called savant syndrome, and it was depicted in Rain Man. You know, Dustin Hoffman. All of the, toothpicks or whatever would drop, and he would know exactly how many toothpicks fell. And this phenomenon, maybe not exactly exemplified in the movie, but this is a real phenomenon where there's a calculation process that our conscious mind doesn't have access to that is actually happening at all times. So in the savant syndrome, people are actually able to access that and vocalize what they're actually computing at like a micro level. But I believe that we all have that capability. If their brain is doing that without them even thinking about it doing it, our brains are doing that as well. So there's some deeply subconscious aspect of our brain that is making an impossible amount of micro calculations, so many so that our conscious brain couldn't even actually fathom it.
Yeah.
And so that's actually guiding our intuition. So it's not some woo-woo mystical thing. This is a computational aspect of our brain that
or an adaptability of the body to feel. Like if you think of us as evolved beings, how many thousands of years, have we protected ourselves from death and, whatever else.
And that's another aspect, and I think that's real as well. And I think, but for people who have a hard time with this intuition, like, why would I trust that? But if you think about it as like, this is actually the most perfect, analyzing computational aspect of you that's just shrouded because it's happening at such a fast level. It would be like trying to analyze the program code of a computer that spits out an answer like this. You can't see the code, you just know the answer, but the code is happening so fast, at the speed of light as those binary ones and zeros are just flying through your processor. That's maybe one way to look at it. And of course, I do think we're sensitive to energies and wisdom that's beyond just the self. But I thought that was like an interesting way to look at it. And it's really freed me up to really trust my intuition more, perhaps because I am, so in that kind of chess playing rational side. I needed that justification, just like science in some ways is the new, language of spirituality. That's what Joe Dispenza talks about all the time. Like, we got to give people a little science so they can actually go on this spiritual
Makes it
path.
comfortable.
Yeah.
I'd add something to that. And in that comfort, we become more open and more receptive.
Right.
And I add something to that with the nervous system as we clear the clutter of our trauma in our past, because we've all got that, well, at least most of us do. We're maybe not able to make the unconscious conscious, those unconscious processes that are happening so fast, but we're able to connect to them in a new way because our nervous system now, the ENS, the enteric nervous system, the brain, the amygdala, all the parts of our body and brain that are literally fighting to protect ourselves, and the threat funnels that we have that are assessing our environment, they begin to dull down. And then we're able to access that process of that intuition through the nervous system, through our environment at faster rates, and we're able to trust that because we're not so fucking busy worrying about staying alive at this unconscious level.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, off to your...
So back to discernment. Yeah, I love that. The toothpick picture gave me a picture of what so many women can do, which is walk into a room of people and know exactly what needs to be done. Like feel people, know who needs what, know who's sick, know who needs, just know what needs to be done. And it's so important for the feminine not to doubt herself, because that's something that so many women struggle with. Yeah. Self-doubt, self-worth, just doubting, because in so many ways too, since we live so far in a little bit more masculine paradigm, or a lot of what the feminine thinks isn't in alignment with a lot of the ways things are going. So it perpetuates self-doubt at sort of a collective level, but then on the individual level, because of our own trauma and wounding or whatever it is, we just doubt ourselves so much because often the head and the heart can disagree. So really discernment, know that the feminine isn't this like airy fairy flowy, I'll just wait for a masculine to come on and make my decisions. It's really discerning, and that is really powerful.
I also think
attractive.
Yeah.
it's super sexy. I mean, it's all, I mean, when I've experienced it, and I experience it all the time with Vi, it's super sexy, and it's like, it's access to, it's magic. I'm like, wow, magic.
Yeah.
It's real, and that's like such a really powerful thing to be able to like behold and like be able to have, in union and in anything, and cultivate internally and external and in partnership as well.
Yeah. So trusting ourselves. And then I'd say in relationship, it's really learning how to be compassionate and be the muse. So I think so often women, we have less opportunities to be aggressive. We, for the most part, don't fight as much, don't hit as much, don't yell as much. I'm making massive generalizations, but there are some fair generalizations to make. And so our weapon isn't our judgment. Our weapon is often in the mind. And I see this so much with women in relationship. If they're not getting their needs met, they're not feeling seen, they won't necessarily get aggressive, but they'll get judgy. They'll get critical. They'll get nitpicky. They'll start collecting evidence for all the things she's doing wrong, all the ways she's not appreciated, so on and so forth. And so that moves us out of the feminine energy of being compassionate and being the muse. And I've learned so much in our dynamic that me trying to coach Steph or judge him or criticize him or tell him how to do it, it's frustrating for us both. And it may move him an inch, but it doesn't last. And then he's just resentful, and it completely throws off our polarity. But if I can be compassionate for whatever he's going through and be the muse, like call him forward through my love, through my compassion, through my sexuality, through, again, not being seductive in a manipulative way, but just being that like that muse, that thing that calls him forward, that feels so much better to me, so much more enlivening than the criticism and the judgment and the collecting evidence. So I think that's really an opportunity for the feminine, is to move out of that dynamic. You see so much on television shows, just women throwing the men under the bus, and men aren't good for anything, and like, it's all up to me, and let's move out of that dynamic and that paradigm, and again, make it more that equitable thing. And for women, the feminine dynamic that I feel really compelled to step more into is that muse rather than the critic.
Wow.
Yeah.
You are.
Beautifully said. I want to pose this to both of you guys, because one of the issues with intuition, and I've seen this with a lot of female friends and even in our partnership, if someone's experienced somebody gaslighting them, which is basically a woman has an intuition. There's something fucking going on there. And then the man puts on his lawyer hat and is just like, well, I will tell you all the reasons why you're wrong, even sometimes knowing that she's right, or also not wanting to look at the point that she's making or not wanting to agree. So you get, that's what gaslighting is. It's a term for when somebody makes you feel like you're crazy for what you're actually believing. And over time, if someone does that, and a lot of times, if you're with a good lawyering type of person, and it could be masculine or feminine, they will present such a case that you're like, maybe I am fucking totally losing my mind when you've known that you've been right. So what would you say, what would you say? And it's not that intuition is always right either. I remember a time where I was with a partner, and this was before my polyamory days, and she came over to my house and she was like, whose shampoo is that in the shower? I was like, yours? She's like, no, it's not. And then like 20 minutes later, he was like, oh yeah, I brought that over from the place. I was like, see, there's nothing there. So it's not to say that every intuition is right. Like sometimes, and for everybody, we have to know that our intuition is a guide, but it's not like you're batting 100.
Sometimes it's fear disguised as intuition.
I got a question
Yeah.
that's just I think it's gonna maybe fuck all of this up.
Right.
What if intuition is never wrong, and if you're wrong, it's not intuition?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Question, but I mean, I don't.
I think no. I
Jury's
think,
out on
My
that.
I think
intuition
you
says
fucking.
yes.
I think you fucking nailed it.
My
I honestly
intuition's
think you
never
nailed it. So then it's the discernment
Yes.
between whether it's intuition or whether this is a projection of an idea masquerading as intuition. Just like you can say, "I'm talking to my soul," but it's really your ego who's impersonating your soul rather than your soul talking to you, which is where it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
But I think that's
Confusing.
a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah.
But then to go back to the gaslighting situation, I know, Vi, you've experienced it. I'm imagining
Yes.
that you've experienced it as well. So what do you say to a person who's in that situation, and then how to regain your trust in your own feminine intuition?
Well, I know for me, it was leaving the situation.
Yeah,
Like
same.
Literally gonna
it
say,
was,
get the fuck out.
yeah, it was, I mean, I would literally this was an ex of mine. I'd walk in thinking I was wearing a green shirt and walk out thinking my shirt was red. I was like, wait a second, and it's especially if consider yourself an intelligent person, it's even more confusing because it's a whole head trip. So for me and for people that I've worked with, it has been getting out of the dynamic, being like, no, because so much of breaking the cycle of gaslighting is taking our power back.
Yeah.
And just being like, no, I really trust myself.
And you can see too, when you have the boundary enough to be able to step away for it, even if it's something that's temporary, taking some time to just totally break from, the codependent entanglement, it's very, very clear.
Yeah.
Like it can become very clear to you how much that's actually taking place when you're constantly in the energy of somebody that's doing that to you. And I mean, I can speak hugely to that, just the contrast of being in partnership that is stable and my intuition is really honored, like there's so much belief in what comes through for me, but then to feel all the times where I just knew, but not having the evidence or having the lawyering going on, it's like I shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and started to just question, literally, am I crazy?
Yeah.
But it took enough self-love and boundary and, like as she said, discernment to give myself the ability to just take the space from it so that I could decide for myself.
Yeah, I think that's when tribe and soul family is really important.
Yeah.
Because having other people that can say, no, Violana, you're correct here. Like you're seeing truth here. And having those kind of mirrors, I think is also an important part of supporting someone to get out of that gaslighting dynamic.
And I think for a man, to really, I remember I had my first experience with a really intuitive woman was not someone, we only dated for a very short amount of time, saw each other a handful of times. We actually took a trip to Peru together too, well before the Peru trips of the modern era. But I remember one time we were in a room and in a situation, and it was, I think, in Vegas actually, and she told me something, and then I was like, no. And she was like, she sensed something with one of the people in the room, and I was like, no way. And I listed this whole reason, all of these reasons why, and she's like, those are all really good reasons. Like, that's really impressive that you laid that out, but I'm right. And I was like, and I started laughing. I was like, what? Like, did you not? I just laid out the whole case. It's logically impeccable. She's like, I know, it was great. Like, you really did a good job. Like, good work, but I'm right. And we laughed about it. And I think partly because it was, a trivial situation. There was no emotional entanglement. I thought it was sexy, and I was like, this is fun. This was cool. And it turned out like weeks later that absolutely what she was sensing was absolutely true, and I was completely wrong. And that was the first moment where I was like, damn, she had access to magic.
Yeah.
She had access to something that I, at that point, I was 27, 28 at that point. I just couldn't, I didn't have that access. And she just had this purview into it. And I was always so impressed, and I'll never forget that moment. And it was a great lesson for me that even though I was logically impeccable, I was wrong. Obviously, I wasn't logically impeccable, but it seemed that way. And so I've always approached, that sense of intuition with like, I know that this is possible, and I know that there's an access to the unseen that's available. And so just giving the space for that, and knowing too that it can be something masquerading as intuition that's not that as well. And so if you're a woman, don't say like, what's my intuition and I know it's right. Yeah, if it's your intuition, maybe it is right, but it could also be something else masquerading. So all of those caveats, I think it's such an important issue. I'm just so glad that you brought that to the forefront so that we could like bat around how to deal with that in union, because I think it is just a super important aspect.
Yeah, well, I think Steph can feel it. Like he knows when I'm speaking from my intuition, because there's not emotion, there's not charge to it. He can feel it. Mm-hmm. And then he can feel when it's a fear, and he's like, I don't think that's really your intuition. I think that's fear. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, the beauty of the mirror. You start to know, I'm sure Aubrey can tell, like when you're really clear and when you may be triggered. And it's like that, and you with him as well. Mm-hmm. And as you get to know each other more, not just you two, but just people in general, then it's like, it's useful to have that mirror. It's like, yeah, that's your intuition. No, that's not. That's your ego disguising, or your fear disguising as intuition.
And also as a woman and as a partner, like a lot of times understanding that my logic and analysis of a situation, let's say a particular, like a health situation, like my body of knowledge and my expertise is going to have me logically I will have gone down the path. Mm-hmm. So supporting me in that, if she starts to go down the path, it's like, well, yes, I've already thought of that and the three alternatives that are that, and I could go explain all that, and maybe that's fine for, the comfort of the conversation. Mm-hmm. But where it gets really interesting is when she just puts her hand on my belly and goes, oh yeah, this is what's wrong with you. And I feel it. And then I'm like, okay, now I got some real information that I couldn't figure out from reading my books and talking to, the doctors and, figuring this out. It's like, this is now access to something else and I always take that perfectly seriously. And it's such a gift if you're able to tap that. And it's not just women who can do that. Yeah. Men can do that by accessing their feminine. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you were saying, Steph, about consciously expanding your range.
Yes.
So that you can go into like a deep feminine receiving and access those same things as well as your, vigilant masculine both. And I think it's the more range we have, the better. Balance isn't staying in a narrow band. It's just how big can your range be?
That really is the balance for me. And it reminds me of a story around shamanism and what shamans had access to. We live in a contemporary world where we value so much over everything else, logic and reason, goal attainment, achievement, being in an objective driven world, and everything else falls by the wayside. This discernment, this intrinsic knowing gets lost. But in the ancient days where shamanism, the practice of bringing wholeness into community and society, was more palatable, more practiced, more loved, there was this is outside of the realm of reason. Hey, reason has power. It has a place. It has meaning in our world. And the balance point on that spectrum of range is this also has meaning. Let's play in this realm as well. We don't do that in the world today. And, if you were to split masculine and feminine and just use contrast dynamics, you would say that reason and logic is masculine, that discernment and intuition is more feminine. And because we don't value the feminine energetic or the various realms of the feminine, what happens is we put that by the wayside. We think it's not good. Mm-hmm. It doesn't carry any weight. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's not the truth. Because this realm of logic and reason is very valuable. And it really, one of the reasons why it carries value is because of the feminine, the complementary opposite. Mm-hmm. We've lost touch with. Mm-hmm. I know I did for a long time.
And think of how valuable that is in a partnership, sacred union or any partnership, to actually honor that feminine coming through. Like seeing where you might have blind spots because your logical mind is so, on this path because of everything that it knows. But what if you get a different lens into something, and then for you tapping into your own feminine, that, wow, that actually feels really right. It's bringing forward the feminine within both of us. And we've seen it time and again, from health issues to, business stuff. We're very deep with each other and we talk deeply about a lot of things all day long. And I mean, it's been incredible in our expansion to just his trust in my feminine and his own feminine that's in agreement with, you know, a lot of the things that come through for me. It's like modern day magic.
Yeah, we can get so lost in like the logos, you know, this is the logos, this is the law, this is, so you think of that scene from Avatar where there's the king and Jake Sully comes in and all of the Avatar people have been just, you know, terrorizing and fucking with their village, and they're like, okay, according to our law, we put this, you know, ghost walker to death. And then the queen, who's the medicine woman of the tribe, she kind of sniffs him, looks around, like gets her intuition and says, no, not this one. You know, like this one is something. And then he ends up, you know, jumping on the giant dragon and saving the tribe. But it was that intuition that I think must be blended with the logos. In the right balance, it's like, it's both. And, you know, of course, I don't know how that would work in the legal system. And it's, you know, there's a lot of issues on the large and we're out of the tribe. But in our own union, in our own thing, it's like, this is what makes sense according to the logos, but this is what makes sense according to the pathos, according to the emotion and like what the emotional body, and then you ultimately have to decide between them.
What about masculine for use?
Shadow work is imperative for every human being. For men in particular, we have repressed big emotions, sadness, anger, rage, and you may think, well, really? Because so many people see and view the masculine as aggressive, but it's leaky. It's not contextualized. It's not connected to their trauma or their pain. It's not connected to what they've actually experienced that's been so painful that they keep harboring. And that's just like a release valve. That's just letting go of a little steam every time. And so shadow work and being witnessed by other men is so important. And to be in a container where you're able to emotionally release without being shamed for your anger, that's a safe space to do so, whether it's with another man, even on your own at some points. Solitude's a real important part of healthy masculine expression. But being witnessed by other men and moving through core trauma. I love this analogy. I use it all the time. When we were doing that inner child workshop, and you use the analogy of the gold chain. So you have a thin gold chain and it's in your drawer and you're clearing out your drawer and you see the gold chain, it's got a lot of knots in it and you're trying to do the knots, and you usually come to me, Steph, do these knots. I'm like, I don't want to fucking do it. It's too, I can't be bothered.
You know when it's really tangled and
it's
all
tangled,
knotted
these
up?
knots, I don't want to do it. I'm doing something else. I'm in my masculine. And but you get to that core knot, and then all the other knots just unravel. And there's something to be said for that with the emotional pain that we experience. And men don't do their shadow work. They don't have healthy outlets. We have evolved in tribe, in bands of brothers, in brethren. We are so isolated as men. We drive in cubicles, or we're stuck in a cubicle, whether it's a train or a bus. We work in cubicles. We come home. We're not happy with ourselves. We compress ourselves. I'm generalizing here, and I'm very clear on that. And I think it's a fairly educated generalization. So many people are unhappy in their lives, and men don't have that healthy outlet. So shadow work, exploring those the unwanted parts of us and the unmet needs that we have, exploring that baggage that we have, actually being okay with expressing it and releasing it so it doesn't leak out in relationships. It doesn't play out in negative patterns. Men suffer and we're told, you got to be a man the fuck up. Don't express that. Don't be angry. But we do end up getting angry. Even if those that play sports, contact sports, and they have a great deal of anger and they're able to express that, when there's no cognitive or emotional connection or real witnessing that, hey, brother, it's okay that you release this pain and this emotion. It's okay that you let yourself free of that burden. It's okay that you were hurt by your father or your mother, or that babysitter raped you, or that you were hit by a truck and it still hurts you when you were 9 years old and you can't shake not feeling safe in your body. That's okay. You can let that go. You can feel and experience it, and all of you is welcome. We need that as human beings, but men really need that. If we're talking about a union merging together, men need that deep work, that shadow work. And, you know, off the bat of that, with respect to relationship, we have to be willing to go down those paths that are really uncomfortable, that really hurt us and that are painful, and let the feminine in our lives witness that as well and see that. See us not taking it out on them or our families or our communities, but being responsible for that, being willing to look at our fears, being willing to look at our pains, our struggles, being willing to have difficult conversations, being willing to step into our truth, being willing to celebrate. Really celebrate our wins as men. I struggled so, and that's receiving. I struggled so much to receive, and I would never celebrate my wins. I was always on to the next thing. My beloved grounds me into, wow, you celebrate that. You deserve that. That's amazing. And that's
I resonate with that.
Yeah. That's a beautiful reminder for me.
Do you realize what you did? Yeah, sure, sweet. I did, of course.
Yeah.
Not really.
Not really.
Not really at all.
Not getting it.
Not really. Not getting it. And I just think that we need that. And, as a tangible tool, do your shadow work, be reflective, spend 10 minutes every day at the end of your day and ask. We talk about Greek mythology for a moment, or Greek philosophy. The Greeks would say, the ancient Greeks would say, spend some time at the end of every day reflecting on who you've been, who you were with others, how you feel about yourself. What could you have done differently? What could you have done better? What would you want to change? What were you grateful for? Whatever it may be, that reflective practice is everything. And let that be that centering solitude practice. Let that be nature, connect to earth because we're so disconnected from earth. And be in that space of, let me receive some wisdom by actually checking in with myself. And find support groups, find a coach, find a therapist, find a counselor, find a shaman, a spiritual teacher. Don't do it alone. Like, isolation and solitude are very different. Solitude is voluntary because we know there's benefit in being on our own. Isolation is when we hate ourselves. We're in self-loathing and we're fearful and we're hiding from the world. Too many men do that. And that fucks relationship. It destroys intimacy and union because they're checked out. I was always checked out. And even then, if I have to be really honest, even now, sometimes I'm checked out with you. If I'm in my stuff and I'm not dealing with it, I'm checked out with her. Like, I'm physically there, but I'm not emotionally there. And that's because I'm not dealing with the thing that I need to deal with that will actually give me freedom. But I'm addicted to staying in it because it's familiar, and familiarity is safe. And so in order for us to feel safe as men, we have to feel unsafe in a safe environment. I hope that makes sense. But that's what I would say for that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of really important points there. And I think one, that practice of solitude, as you said, I remember one time, I think it was actually the last podcast we did, you were talking about, you were going on some wild vision quest where you brought like a buckskin and a knife, like a fucking real Aussie out there. And you're like, I'll find some shelter somewhere.
Yeah. No tent, nothing.
Yeah. And like it's doing the same thing that I said. It's knowing something about yourself. It's learning, trusting yourself to be able to go into the void of the unknown and with your own essence and your own skills and your own body, and knowing that you can survive, which I think is important. Yeah. Also sitting with yourself. I mean, I talked to so many people who are badasses, and I talked to them about my 6 days in the darkness, and they're like, get the fuck out of here. And they've accomplished like the most incredible things, done ayahuasca journeys, all this other stuff, but they're like, hell no, And it's like, it's interesting. Like, what do you mean? Like, what are you afraid of? Yourself? Like, what are you going to find in there? Like monsters under your bed? No, you're afraid of your mind. Yeah. And that's like the thing. And unless we're in the solitude without any distractions, we won't ever see what monsters are under the bed. So we'll always be running. Yep. We'll always be diving and not letting our foot dangle because we're worried that something's going to grab at us. So that point, I think, is really a great point. And the other point is just the rites of passage with your brothers in general. Right now, what do we do? What do we do when we get together with the boys? Drink, or unless we're playing like pickup ball or, golf, which involves drinking. There's like very few activities that don't involve intoxication, which fine. I drink too. Like, it's not like I'm against that aspect, but you got to do other stuff too.
Well, there's no substance in our modern day rites of passage.
Exactly.
The ancients knew
those bonding rituals are not there where you're like going through some real shit and like being vulnerable and stepping into that with your brothers. Man, it's fucking powerful.
Yep. It's like everything. It
cannot be understated. And to be honest, I had some resistance to like, quote, men's work. I was like, like I'm doing the work and we can mix it up, what does it matter? But then I started having men's groups out in Sedona where it was just men. And it's a different thing. It is a different thing when there's not a single woman around. Like, one woman in the dynamic changes everything. Maybe for the better, but it changes everything. And like whatever happens there in the men's group, it's just radically different when it's just men. Yeah. And there's something really beautiful to that. And so just grateful that you're not only doing the work individually, but offering that, because it's so needed. And I think until you experience it, you don't even recognize how needed that it is.
Yeah.
Well, all right. This was a long one and a good one. I'm fired up. I could keep going.
I know, we can keep going.
I'm good to go. Let's keep going. I'm in now. I'm in the masculine now. Let's go.
We're getting the stride. So you guys put together something that you're going to offer people, which is amazing.
Yeah. So we thought people may be curious about some of the things we're talking about. So we put together an audio that's an experiential process that you can do with your partner, similar to what we facilitated at Fit for Service. So you can just go to christinehassler.com/sacred union and get it for free.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I like the process. I think it's really good.
It's so worth it.
Yeah.
Beyond worth it. It was one of the most profound experiences of my entire life. Like right up there with plant medicine. Aww. It was extraordinary. Thank you.
And as we did all of our, I did all the whole round of wrap up and integration and all the Zoom calls. I talked to everybody afterwards. It was one of the highlights of everybody's trip. And for many people, it was the highlight. And we did some amazing shit. We had an ecstatic dance with Parangi playing music. We had, breath work with 8 of us guiding people under the, magic of Bear Mountain and the Red Rocks. We had a soul wander out on the land where people were finding arrowheads and like hieroglyphs and crazy, seeing crazy animals and having like encounters with, but overwhelmingly, like I would say the majority of people said, yeah, that thing that everybody was, looking forward to all these other things, but that workshop you guys provided was just one of the most powerful experiences for everybody. So
thank you for having us.
Yeah,
that's what
for sure.
Thank you for the honor of facilitating it, because
you guys fucking brought it.
You did. I was not expecting that.
You guys fucking brought it. I remember I had a little chuckle to myself, internally when you were guiding us through that exercise, and then the women were really going through that, and you just talked straight to the men, and you said, "Men, feel that," and I was like, "Damn, yeah, all right." Like if I wasn't already, like I for sure am now. It was like you're like, do not even think about not feeling this. You were like, not gonna let anybody skate by without letting that go in deep. I was like, you fucking get them, Steph. You fucking get them.
my partner, once we stood up, he was it was a really powerful experience for him, and he just looks at me and goes, "This is intense." It's really deep.
We just were like, we talked that morning about what we were gonna do actually, and I was feeling into the group, and I'm like, we can take them. Like they're ready. It'll be uncomfortable, but this group is ready, and the energy and everything going on in the world, like they can do it. They can do it.
And they did.
Yeah, massively.
So much love and respect to the whole tribe who went through that as well. All right, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I love you all so much.
Love you too.
Goodbye, everybody. Peace. Thanks for checking out this video. For more like it, please subscribe to my channel. And of course, the Aubrey Marcus podcast with new episodes every single week. And follow me on Instagram @AubreyMarcus. Thank you so much.